Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today's wine is taking us to Chinon, and we're looking at the Domaine de la Chapelle 2023 Chinon Les Lutteurs. Situated in the hamlet of Le Puy in the commune of Cravant-les-Côteaux, Domaine de la Chapelle was established in 1983 by Philippe Pichard when he took over his grandparents' small polyculture domaine. Immediately identifying the importance of soil health for quality viticulture and winemaking, Philippe made the decision to begin farming his vineyards organically in the late 1980s. After some health complications arose for Philippe, he made the decision to sell the domaine in 2012 to Francis and Annick Jourdan, but Philippe remained on at the estate, guiding the domaine until his retirement in 2019. With no heirs, Francis and Annick Jourdan made the decision to sell the domaine in 2022 to longtime lover of the Loire and real estate developer Laurent Dumas, ushering in an exciting new chapter for the domaine. The estate's vineyards and cellar are managed by Cédric Monroy, who has been on since Philippe's retirement, and the estate is comprised of around 17 hectares of vines, of which 15.5 hectares are planted with Cabernet Franc, and their vineyards and cellar are certified biodynamic with Demeter. So today's wine is taking us to the all-important alluvial terrace in the commune of Cravant-les-Côteaux in Chinon. And I use the term all-important because when we think of the archetypal Chinon Rouge, with its soft early drinking style, savory berried fruits, and noble herbaceous undertones, these wines are often coming from this alluvial terrace. In fact, about 50% of the Chinon appellation's production is coming from Cravant-les-Côteaux, thanks in part to this large alluvial terrace that dominates the commune. And actually, about 68% of the area under vine in Cravant-les-Côteaux is on this alluvial terrace. So where exactly are we in Chinon? Well, we are on the north side, or the right bank of the Vienne River, and this alluvial terrace stretches 9 kilometers and across 3 communes, the communes of Chinon, Cravant-les-Côteaux, and Ponzoul. But about 75% of the area under vine on the alluvial terrace is in fact concentrated in the commune of Cravant-les-Côteaux. And the vineyards here start very close to the Vienne River, and they stretch inland around 2 kilometers towards the slopes. Now, this area of the alluvial terrace has some key features with respect to the growing environment. So first and foremost, because of our proximity to the Vienne River and the many little tributaries and creeks and streams that kind of weave their way across this alluvial terrace, these vineyards here have relatively good access to water. And as a result, these vineyards tend to yield a little bit more than, say, the vineyards on the slopes. Secondly, the topography here is rather low-lying and quite flat. And because of this, the vineyards here are actually easier to work. So the vineyard work and the harvesting does not necessarily need to be done by hand. This flat topography also means that these vineyards receive uninterrupted sun exposure during the growing season, which is, of course, very good for ripening. Finally, we need to talk about soils. Alluvial soils represent a very important part of the viticultural landscape across the Chinon appellation, and they're actually a lot more complex than meets the eye. So much so, in fact, that the Chinon appellation, with the help of researchers, have identified 18 different individual terroir units of alluvial origin across the appellation. And they've grouped these soils into 3 categories. We have the recent alluvial soils of the lowest lying terraces, we have the recent and ancient alluvium of the low terraces, and then we have the ancient alluvium of the middle and upper terraces. Here in Cravant-les-Côteaux, we do find all 3 groups of alluvial soils on the alluvial terrace, but of course, for simplicity's sake, there are some generalizations that we can make. So this area is dominated by sandy or silty sandy soils, with the odd little pocket of clayier soils here and there. The topsoil are very deep, and then they are then followed by subsoils that are either sand or silty sand, or we will find some areas where the subsoil is gravels. Now, the combination of these topsoils and subsoils all across this area will essentially vary depending on where you are. The other thing to note with regards to the alluvial terrace is the stoniness can vary quite widely as well. So we will find some spots that have virtually no stones whatsoever, so the conditions almost look beach-like, and then we have some areas where we have 50 to 100% stones or gravels. Now, All of this is important because these soils will dictate the vine's access to water. So whatever combination of sand or silt or sandy silt and clay or gravels or what have you, this will ultimately impact how the vine receives water and that uptake of water. This directly impacts the vine's growth and yield. And because of the lighter texture of the soils that we find here and the access to water that these vineyards have, the fruit from the vineyards on the alluvial terrace tends to be best suited to producing lighter, softer, early drinking styles, less structured styles of Cabernet Franc. But of course, there are always exceptions to that rule. And that brings me to today's wine. And this is coming from a combined 1 hectare of vines from 2 different lieux-dits. We have La Bellonnière and Du Lait. And these 2 lieux-dits are very close to the Domaine, and they're about 850 meters apart from one another. And we are really in the heart of the alluvial terrace here in Cravant-les-Côteaux. In terms of soils, because we are on the alluvial terrace, there are a lot of similarities between these 2 parcels, but there is some nuance here that is worth noting, and what I think really helps to contribute to the way this wine presents in the glass. So at La Bellonnière, actually we have a little bit more clay influencing this particular parcel. So the topsoil is sand, but the subsoil is clay. So that's very interesting. And then at Du Lait, we have a sandy, silty topsoil, and the subsoil is more gravels. In addition to this, the other factor that really defines this wine is the age of the vine. So this cuvée is coming from some of the oldest vines of the Domaine. At Bellonnière, the vines were planted in 1962-63. At Du Lait, the vines were planted in 1970-71. So because of the age of the vines, that means that the yields are reduced, so we're getting a lot more concentration here. So the combination of the soils as well as the age of the vines means that the wine here, Les Lutteurs, it actually presents with a lot more body, a lot more flesh, a lot more energy, and ultimately structure and ageability than the wines that we would typically see coming from the alluvial terrace in Cravant-les-Côteaux. So from a winemaking perspective, the fruit for this wine is all hand harvested and it is all destemmed. And the fruit is transferred via gravity into these large conical wooden vats. And the fermentation is done with indigenous yeast. And the total time on skins is around 21 days. And the approach to extractions here is simply infusion. Following the post-fermentation maceration, the free-run wine and pressed wine are separated, and only the free-run wine makes it into this cuvée. And the aging takes place over around 12 months, and the aging is in a combination of those large conical wooden vats as well as some 400-liter oak barrels. Now, before I get into my tasting notes on this wine, a few notes on the vintage. This is actually the first time I am doing a video on a Cabernet Franc from the Loire from the 2023 vintage. So, what was this vintage like? Well, let's say it was complicated to say the least. The summer conditions were a little bit cooler, more humid, so there was a lot of disease pressure, but conditions improved quite a bit as we got later into the summer and into the fall. So temperatures warmed up, conditions became much drier, much sunnier, so there was actually really favorable conditions for ripening in the later part of the season leading up to harvest. Granted, it is important to note that across the board there's a lot of heterogeneity in terms of parcels, and there's a lot of variability in that regard, but in general, based on the wines that I have tasted thus far, 2023 seems to be a nice balance between the 2021 and 2022 vintages. 2021 was a very cool, wet vintage. 2022 was the exact opposite. It was a warm, dry vintage. And I find that the 2023s have the freshness of 21, but a little bit more maturity than what we've seen in most of the 2021. So they almost match the maturity, phenolic maturity of the 2022s, but they're also packaged in a relatively lightweight frame. So the alcohols are in that 12 to 13% ballpark for the most part. The acidities are nice and high. So I really do believe that the 2023s will go the distance from an aging perspective. It's just a very classic vintage overall. So let's dive into this wine. So immediately the nose presents really pure. There's a lot of clarity, a lot of translucency. And there's a beautiful fruit herbal balance in the wine. And I would say there's actually a little bit of a juiciness to this wine as well on the nose. And I don't often explain or articulate the nose as being juicy, but this actually presents a little bit juicy on the nose. And in terms of the fruit profile, I would say it's on equal footing with the herbal profile. And the fruits actually lean a little bit more dark fruited. So I'm getting some small dark berries like black currant. There's a little bit of wild black raspberry, a touch of red currant there, a touch of cherry as well. And the herbal profile, the pyrazines, actually are really quite lovely. And I love there's a delicacy to them, almost reminiscent of soft herbs, things like basil, tarragon. There's also a little bit of almost like a fresh moss note, which is really nice. There's a pepperiness to the nose as well. There's a little bit of florals here too. Yeah, the nose is really, really lovely. Super inviting, very clear, very pure. Just there's a nice lift to it as well. Nice fruit profile. Just it makes you want to just dive right in. In terms of the palate, those kind of darker, smaller berried fruits come through in a really, really nice way. There's also a little bit more, I would say the florals actually punch through on the palate a little bit more. Yeah, it's quite impressive. There was a little bit of floral on the nose, but the palate is actually much more perfumed, almost reminiscent of rose water. That combined with the herbals make for a really nice, savory, earthy profile to this wine. The palate is also very peppery. Yeah, the palate has just this wonderful melange of peppercorns, like kind of a mix of pink and black peppercorns, which is really, really nice. There's also a touch of like a anise kind of licoricey note to the palate as well, which is quite lovely. The acidity is really, really beautiful. It's bright, it's lively, it's succulent. It's very persistent as well, but it's also extremely in balance with the fruit. The tannins are gorgeous, very in keeping with where this is coming from in Chinon and in Cravant-les-Côteaux, in that the tannins are very silky, very fine, beautifully supple in texture. And there's actually a little bit more velvety, crushed velvet kind of structure and grip to the finish of the tannins, which is really nice. Yeah, and the tannins and the fruit and the acid are working really, really well together, super integrated. And there's a beautiful fruit sweetness to the core of this wine as well, which I really quite like. What is particularly impressive about this wine is it has a presence to it. You kind of smell the wine and you think, oh, this is going to be a quaffable, easy drinking style of Chinon, which it is, but there's a lot more going on here. There is concentration, there's depth, there's persistence, there's layers here as well, which is really, really quite impressive. Yeah, it's just delicious. It's got this roundness to it. There's a breadth about this wine. It really does take up space in the mouth, but it's also in this really lithe, medium-bodied, elegant frame. So while it does have some almost grandeur to it, there's a generosity about this wine. It is also packaged in this very lightweight, kind of ethereal frame. This clocks in at 12% alcohol, but it packs a punch. There's so much concentration and depth and flavor and just character in this wine is really, really beautiful. It's balanced, it's energetic, it feels really, really complete. And it also feels like a beautiful expression of this particular part of Chinon that just has a lot of elegance and a lot of thoughtfulness and purity and grace, really. And it's a beautiful introduction to Domaine de la Chapelle for me. I've tasted the wines at some of the salons in recent years, but this is my first time kind of really focusing in on the wine in a more analytical way. And I think the direction that the estate is going in right now is really, really exciting. And it's really awesome for me to have the opportunity to present or introduce, or in this case, reintroduce folks to Domaine, because oftentimes when I'm doing my videos and posts, I'm limited to what I have access to in my local market. So sometimes that means that I can't present all the estates that I want to. So this is a really excellent opportunity for me to showcase a domain that needs to be on your radar and is going to be an exciting one to watch in the years and decades to come. With the new investment with Laurent Dumas and kind of where they are going, it's super, super exciting. And I'm very keen to follow the wines and follow their progression as an estate. And it's really an exciting moment for the Chinon appellation. We've seen some increased investment from outside the region in the appellation in recent years. Laurent Dumas is a perfect example. We also have Anatole de la Brosse of Domaine de Clozier in saumur-champigny that has recently launched his terrace de Grandparent. And then we also have Yvan Massenat of Domaine de Beauséjour and Domaine Belagus in Anjou. So we have seen in recent years some outside investment in the Chinon appellation, and that couldn't make me more excited about the future of Chinon and Loire Valley Cabernet Franc as a whole, because this just shows that these wines are starting to excite people in a way that they want to invest in these appellations and bring these appellations into a whole new limelight, which I think is super, super exciting. So if you're not familiar with Domaine de la Chapelle, this is clearly one to put on your radar and one to keep an eye out as they kind of grow their network of distribution across France and across other parts of the world. But of course, if you have another favorite producer from Chinon, from Cravant-les-Côteaux perhaps, I would love to know who that is in the comments below. And of course, as always, I'll be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.